Now that we've got our pattern, we can determine whether we want a right or left-handed sheath, and this is how to determine that. If the black here on this particular sheath is the good side of the leather has two sides. It has what they call the hair side, which is the side you think of being the good side, and then you have the flesh side, which is the side that doesn't look as good. It's kind of rough. The flesh side is what we would normally want to see. So we put the flesh side for a right-handed knife sheath. We put the flesh side down like this, and we would draw out our pattern, and then this would be the black would be the good side, and so that would make a right-handed sheath. If we want a left-handed sheath, see, this is a right-handed sheath, goes on the belt like this. If we want a left-handed sheath, see, this one would be wrong. If you turn it this way, it's almost right, but you're pulling it out wrong. If you pull it out left-handed, you're pulling out the sharp side up. So if you want a left-handed sheath, you take and you, as you're looking at this, we'll put it like this. As you're looking at this, you want your tab on the right-hand side, on the flesh side of your leather. That way when you cut this out, you fold it up, and at this point the tan color would be the good side of the leather. Again, with left-handed, the black would be the flesh side. The tan side is the good part of the leather now. And so now if we hold it up here, it's just doing right. When we pull our knife, it's coming out correctly. And this is something to take a minute or two and study on. Make certain that you're doing this correctly, because you know you only have one piece of leather. So play with your cardboard, figure out what you want. I have even made cross draw sheaths and all kind of, you can make whatever design you want, but figure out what you want while you got the cardboard stage, and then mark it so that you know what's going on. So we want a right hand sheath, like this. And so what I'm going to write is flesh up, right hand. Okay, so that's all I wrote on my pattern. If you have a piece of cardboard that's tan on both sides, this will really come in handy, because you know I can tell one side from the other, but most pieces of cardboard are not going to have paint on one side, so it'll look the same flipped over one way or another. So mark it in some manner so that you understand which type of sheath, which hand of sheath you're wanting. Okay? Now, we're going to look at our leather. Leather is a natural product. I don't make the leather. I buy the leather and we cut it up for the kits, and we do the best we can with picking out the pieces that will be suitable to make a knife sheath. Sometimes you may have a cut in this leather. It could be on this side too, so you need to kind of flex it a little bit, look at it real good, make sure that you're not having big cuts in it. The cuts in it are the worst problem. And I'll show you a cut. Right here is a cut. That's why I still have this piece of leather. I can easily make a sheath out of this, but I would not send this to my customer because they'd have a time working around that, depending on what they're doing. But we could easily take this sheath, this piece of leather, and make a sheath with it, see, just like that. We just would avoid that cut. We could make a left-handed sheath with it, probably even easier if we wanted a left-handed sheath. See, we're getting way away from it now. So it depends on what you get. You're not going to see a big cut in your leather like that. I will not send it to you like that. You may have a little spot or something on it. This is just a thin spot. This is where when they were skinning the cow, they took a little bit too much of the hide. But it's off in one corner. That's the way we cut it so that you have plenty of leather to do what you need to do. All right. I strongly suggest that you use a pencil or something that's not like a pen, not a big fat marker for sure, because you're going to see this mark on here if we don't get rid of it. If we use the mark to cut it out and leave our mark, you're certainly going to see it. There's no way to get it off of the leather that I know of. So you can get by with taking your nail that I've provided with you in your kit and just scratching your outline around, and that's probably what we should do. Let me see if we can find our nail here. But I doubt that's going to show up very good on the video, so I'll show you what you should do, and then we'll show you what I got to do for the video. And this is the way we have our leather at this point, but we're going to flip it over to cut it. So this was the flesh side, so this needs to be down. So we're going to turn this over, and we're going to look at our one flaw here that we got to worry about. One little flaw there. The rest of that's all right. And so we want to keep our flesh side down. And so at this point we're cutting through our top surface of our leather, and that's also what we're going to be marking. So I'm going to be conservative with my leather. I'm going to look at it real good along this edge and make certain that I don't have any problems. So I'm looking right along this edge, looking at it, make sure I don't have any problems. If I got problems, I'm going to leave them on the leather. I'm not going to cut them into my project. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any major hiccups there. We're going to look on this side. Right here is where, when they tan the leather, they bite it with little clips and stretch it and things, and that's one of those little clip marks. So I don't want that in my project. So we're going to come down here. We've got good leather, so we're going to put it on here. We're just going to make sure, see right there is our thin spot. We're just going to make sure we're off of that. And I think everything else has looked okay. But you need to get this, and it's okay if you put a weight or something on it. That'll help you hold it down. Might even get down there. I don't have another weight. I'll put a hammer on it. There we go. Help us hold it down so that it'll be I'm going to move this, and I can see that, but it's hard to see, and that's kind of what you want when we go to cut this out. Now it's going to be impossible, I think, to see that on the camera, so we're going to go ahead and draw it with a pen. Just going to make sure that we're getting it all. And we're still plenty big on this. We could cut it down a little more if we needed to, if we get crazy with it. And so we're just going to look at it before we move it, make sure we got all of our marks. Sometimes a pen don't mark good, but anyway. And so there's our pattern put out. And when we fold this up and fold that down, it's going to be a right-handed sheath. So pay attention to your pattern. The flush side, if you write flush side on it, that's what the flush side needs to go down. Okay? And when you're cutting, you need the flush side down. You want to cut from the top of your leather down You can cut the other way, but if you mess up a little bit and you cut the flesh side like twice or something, it doesn't show as bad. If you're cutting on your good side a couple of times, it's gonna be an issue. All right, so save your pattern. You know, if you ever make another knife, this size knife, anywhere close to it, you can make this pattern work, no problem. Okay. So I'm going to do the safe thing. I'm going to use my straight edge as much as I can. So I'm going to put this up here, and we're going to use it as much as we can on our pattern. Because we're going to have to cut with this thick leather probably twice or maybe even 3 times. Okay, so we got that part cut. We're going to come on down here, and we'll catch another little bite of it. Alright, so we got that. And we'll come up here and we'll catch this. How far up we gotta go? We'll catch this. And the curve is the hardest thing you'll have to cut. But we want to make sure that we're cutting all the way through. If you didn't get all the way through the first time, go back. And follow that again. You may even have to follow the third time. And this is what I was talking about, cutting from the flesh side. You may be taking more bites there than you want, and you'd be shredding your top layer. We're trying real hard to get right back in that same groove. So right there, we've got that cut out. I'm gonna take a few minutes and I'm gonna work this around, and we'll bring it back when we got that done. Okay, so there's our piece. I went ahead and cut this curve out without making the straight cuts, like 2 or 3 straight cuts. I want to preserve this piece of leather here because we're going to make a whelp and put in here and make it a little strip of leather that's this shape. So we're gonna work on this just a little bit more, and then we'll get to that. So, but we want to save some of this other leather for that piece. Okay, at this time we can go back through here and we can kind of clean up a couple of little bumpy places and make it smooth. We'd like to make this as smooth and round as we can. And the way you do that is you make like a stop sign shape and cut 4 square, and then 8, and then 16, and then 32, that kind of thing. You kind of go from square to octagon to 16. I don't know what 16 is, but it'll make it round, and that's what we're wanting. What we're wanting to check is right here on our transitions is that we haven't undercut in here. We want to cut straight down and just straight down. We don't want it to be banked up underneath there. To make our curve up here at the top, we have a nice line to follow, so we're just going to cut a little chunks at a time. Take my hat off so Mike can see what I'm doing. And we may come back and dress this a little bit. May use our little thing and draw it again because it's don't look quite round, but it's pretty round right there. But that's how you make a round thing, is you just, and then we could go back in here and nip each one of those corners off again, and it would be even more round. But the round is what's hard to do. Alright, so we need one more piece before we're going to be able to fold this in half and glue it together. So we need this piece that's going to match this edge. So basically on our pattern, here's our pattern. We laid our knife in here. We're going to cut this piece here that's drawn right here. And it doesn't quite have to be that wide, but pretty close to that, because we want this to be a pretty close match to that. We could cut this part out and just lay it on our leather and draw it and do the same thing we just did, but I'll show you a little trick that'll make it pretty easy. Alright, and it doesn't matter, you know, which piece of leather you use for this. I usually use a fairly thick piece. This piece tapers off, this edge tapers off, and if we had to, we could certainly use that. We could use across the top here is thinner too, but I like this big thick piece. Depends on your taste. This is certainly not an ultralight sheath by any means, but you could certainly get it lighter if you choose thinner places to work with. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this. It already has this shape pretty much, and so we're going to find where it's got that as close as we can get it, and then we're just going to bump this thing over, and we're going to cut off a little nib down here at the bottom, a little straight nib straight down, and that'll allow us to have like a kind of getting close to the center line, if that makes sense. And so we can, the point of it there is going to be our center line, more or less, and we're going to go to basically where this curve is. We can always take a little bit more off of this. It's hard to put it on there if we don't have it. So we're going to look at it and make sure that we're looking right. And you can feel it under here too to make sure that it's not craziness, and I'm just going to err on the side of caution. I'm just going to scoot it on over a little bit past center. See my point here, point here is at center. I'm going to go maybe a quarter of an inch, a half an inch more than center, and look to make sure that I'm on here pretty straight. And then we're going to just trace this half of it basically. And we don't have to trace up here. We're not going to cut it that far up. We're going to stop at this corner. And in fact, we'll probably cut it down and stop just below that corner, just a shade, but stop at that corner drawing. And so now that we've got our piece drawn, we can lay it on here and kind of line it up and look and see what it looks like. That'll be fine. We're going to doctor on it a little bit more, but that'll be fine for the moment. So we're going to cut that out. And so we're going to cut straight across here as well. And so we're just going to cut that piece out too. Alright, so we got all of this leather left from our kit. I'm going to give you some suggestions at the end of this video what to do with this, but you could almost make two of these. If you didn't want to use the whelp, or you had a different piece of leather, or maybe some of these ones that have a little bit longer, you could almost make two sheaths with the amount of leather that we're sending you. So keep that in mind. But we can show you some other things you can do with your extra pieces of leather. Pretty neat. So we have our sheath now pretty much made, and so now is when we start trying to kind of fit it together with our knife. Now, this leather, particular leather I have here, is really stiff, and so we're going to benefit by wetting this down and folding it. If your leather is more like this piece, this one's got a more flexible temper, they call it, temper. This one's very stiff, whereas this one's fairly flexible. This folding in half won't be any issue at all. But since this one is stiffer, we're gonna wet this down. And when we wet leather down for what we're doing, we want to wet the whole piece down. Now you got to be careful. If you start scratching this around on your table or start beating on it with stuff, it's going to leave marks on it. But we're going to wet the whole thing down. That way we don't have a dark and a light spot on this leather. If you wet one portion and not another, it'll change the color of your leather even after you dye it. It's strange. So we're going to wet this down a little bit. And all I'm going to do for that is use a little sponge and a little bit of jar. You could just use a paper towel if that's what you had. We've got a little water here, and we want to do the water sparingly. We don't need to sop it, make it sopping wet, but we do want to wet it all over and evenly as we can, so it's one color. And we're going to wet it on the other side too, because inevitably I get it wet spot on this side too. So even though we don't need to wet it on this side for what we're doing, we're going to wet it all over. We just want to make it even, make sure we're getting all of it even looking. Wetter spot and a drier spot it'll show. So we want to make sure we're even with it, especially on the outside, which is what we're looking at. All right. And see, this is already drying. Look how quickly that's drying. We're going to put a little more water on it. We're not trying to drown it. We're just trying to get it to be moist. I'm going to wet this side here. Okay, and we're going to give that maybe 2 or 3 minutes to start to soak up, and you'll feel it starts to become more pliable, much more pliable, just by that little bit that we just did. And if we want it to be even more pliable in a certain spot, now that we've got it more or less wet, right through here we want to make it more pliable, so we're going to add a little extra water right there. And we can go ahead and put it on all of this, it's no problem. But we want to keep our color right, so we're going to add a little bit of extra water right in the middle. And then we're going to look at this side. See that little extra water there? We don't get that off, or we don't dress that up, it'll make a dark spot on that spot. So we want to get our water right. Just keep on, make it all the same color. And then we're going to let this dry for just a few minutes, like I say. We're just going to let her soak up. Alright, now we've had it a few minutes to dry. It doesn't take long, 2 or 3, 4 minutes. We're going to start working our leather over. And this is done gently. Don't like try to crease it. It's not like a paper airplane where you rub your pencil up and down and make a hard crease in it. And get all your sharp things away from it. And we're going to move our cutting board here because it's got some raggedy edges on it too. Get all the sharp stuff away. Because anything that's bumping this, that's poking it, laying metal against it, even these little pieces of cardboard and that kind of thing, all that needs to go away. Leather work has got to be clean. If you start pushing these little pieces of leather or the pieces of cardboard into this, it's going to leave a mark. And so what you're doing at this point is you're basically starting to form this pouch, this leather sheath. And you're trying to make it kind of do what you want it to do. So we want it to do something like this. Something like this. And I start and form it and do it gently, and we're trying to line up our edges here. They may not be perfect, that's perfectly acceptable. You don't have to be perfect at this point. We'll show you how to get them perfect. And you start folding over your back sheath, your back belt loop here. And you start trying to work in this piece so that it will start and fit your knife. If you've got a really expensive knife, a high carbon steel knife, or if your knife's high carbon steel, even if it's not expensive, wrap it in saran wrap for this point, and you can start and put this in here, and we can start and see where this piece needs to be. We may have to take this piece, we can cut it off and make it go in if we need to, or we can, more likely on our case, cut some of this off the edge of it. But we need to figure out where this piece needs to lay. And the other thing is, before we go too much farther, we're going to have to figure out where this piece lays, our belt loop lays, and punch the holes, drill the holes for that, and sew that on. We've got to sew that on prior to us gluing this together. So if you glue it together, you don't have this part done, you're going to be in trouble. You got to follow the steps. Before we're going to glue anything, however, or I'm going to manipulate this much more with any kind of thing, I'm going to let it fully dry. So I'm going to take a break, and we'll come back in maybe 2 hours, 3 hours. We'll see what it looks like. Depends on how much water you put on this is how long it's going to take to dry. But when we get it to this stage where we've got it folded in half nicely, we've got it folded over, the belt loop folded over nicely, let it dry, because when we go to glue it, we want it to be dry. When we go to sew it, we want it to be dry. We don't want to be scratching it up when you're using your needles. If you're missing the hole at all, you'll scratch your top grain of your leather. It looks pretty bad. So get it good and dry first. If you have stamps and different things that you may want to put on this. I have like a little dog paw stamp that I put on it a lot of times, or a wolf's head, or a deer print, or whatever your thing is that you like. Before we do anything else, that's the time when it was still flat. That's the time that you want to do your decorations. So you need to have your decorations on prior to us doing this to us gluing it together. You don't want to try to decorate it when it's in 3 dimensions like this. You want it laying flat when you're doing your stamping. So if you choose to buy additional stamps and that kind of thing to make it fancy, put your name on it or your initials, that's all cool. But do that while it's still flat. For our purposes, we're going to make basically a plain type sheath, not too much additional decorations on it.